Hey, good morning. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Thanks for tuning in this morning, wherever it is you're tuning in from, your backyard. Beautiful day out there. Got our TMP hangouts coming up. You'll hear more about that later. Maybe you're in your kitchen. Maybe you're in another city or another province. Wherever you are, we just want to say welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. And don't forget, send pictures in of what you're watching us on or who you're watching with, because again, it's just a way for us to feel connected even though we're apart. So again, just so glad that you're here. Last week, we kicked off a series called Not a Nice Guy, and what the whole premise is, we want to take a look at some things that Jesus said that on the surface seem rather shocking, if not outright mean or insensitive, especially when held in light of the stereotypical image that we tend to have of Jesus. Someone who's passive and gentle, soft-spoken, loves kids and animals, all that kind of stuff, and dig deeper into why he said those words. And last week, we looked at some words that Jesus spoke to his friends while they're in the middle of a storm, fearing for their lives. And the words he said seemed rather crass if you were just to read them, but when you dig into it, we saw that they're actually comforting, encouraging words. And if you missed that message, you can catch up online at themeetingplace.org. And just at the top of the page, you'll see where it says messages, or you can download the TMP app and click on messages there, and you can get caught up, and I'd encourage you to do that. So, what do you think happened next in that clip from that movie Family Man? I can tell you what didn't happen. There was no hugging, there was no kissing, and there was no high fives. And I know this not just because I've seen the movie, but well, from personal experience. I had something similar happen. It was about 25 years ago, but it feels like it happened yesterday. Now, it wasn't our anniversary. It was my wife's, Lori's, birthday. And unlike the guy in the clip, I hadn't forgotten her birthday. No. It was worse than that. I consider myself a romantic at heart. I love spoiling my wife. And what better day to spoil her on than on her birthday, right? So, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but all day I talked about this big fancy gift that I had bought for her, but she had to wait until dinner, right? Kind of like the guy in the video. Build anticipation. Besides, it's your birthday all day. Well, it's actually not true. I mean, I wanted to build the anticipation, but there was more of a reason for it. I told her she had to wait because I actually hadn't bought the gift yet. You see, my plan was to go to the mall at some point during the day and kind of just cruise up and down. And I'm one of those shoppers that if I'm looking for a gift, I'll just cruise the stores and it'll just spot me as much as I spot it. And I'll go, that's the gift. And I'll buy it. So that's what I was going to do. But time got away from me. And the next thing I knew, the malls were closed. And I had no gift. Heck, I didn't even have a birthday card. So in desperation, I headed to the nearest corner store, which at the time, you may remember this if you've been around Nanaimo for a while, it was the Shell gas station on the corner of Hammond Bay and the Island Highway by the Brick. And I headed in there not to get her a tire gauge or anything like that. Things were bad enough. I just didn't want to make it any worse. But I went in there to see if, it's like, I hope they sell cards here. And so I kind of cruised up and down the aisles, and guess what? I found a card section. And as luck would have it, I found the perfect card. It was full of all this gushy, romantic language, and I'm thinking, this is perfect because I need all of that to kind of soften the blow, right? Well, dinner comes. We eat dinner. And I present my awesome, forgiving, merciful, gracious, did I say awesome? Did I mention that? I did. Wife, the card. As I explained to her my faux pas. And she opened the card, and she read it, And then she said, "Wow, that's the nicest birthday card I've ever received. How thoughtful of you." And then she kind of just tossed the card down onto the table, got up, and walked away. And as she said those words, I could not only hear the disappointment in her voice, I could see it in her eyes. Needless to say, I'm sitting there kind of confused. I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, I knew I blew it with the gift. I admitted that. But this card was perfect. It's like, what couldn't she like about it? And so I picked it up to see what was wrong, and there it was, as plain as day. I can't believe to this day that I didn't see it. Right there on the front of the card in big bold letters were the words, "Happy anniversary," not "happy birthday." There was no hugging, there was no kissing, and there were no high fives. The only thing there was disappointment. Disappointment. You know, disappointment comes as a result of unfulfilled or unmet expectations, right? We become disappointed when people or things don't meet our expectations. And the flip side of that is true as well. We become disappointers when we don't meet other people's expectations. It's an all too painful reality in this world, a reality that can have some very destructive spiritual ramifications. And here's what I mean by that. You know, one of the things we talk a lot about around here is how the biblical narrative from beginning to end is attempting to communicate God's love for you and for me and how extravagant it is, to the point where he loved us so much that he stepped across the universe and came to this planet as a human being, Jesus Christ. And the whole idea of this unconditional love is appealing, but here's the thing. It's really hard for us to understand because we often will take our experience, because that's the only thing we have, is our experience with love, and we will project that onto God. And here's the thing. We don't just do that with our experiences with love. We do it with all our experiences. French mathematician and theologian, a guy named by the name of Blaise Pascal, he said it this way, and this is brilliant. He said, "In the beginning, God made man in his own image, and man returned the favor." And what he was saying is that we do indeed take our human experiences and we project them onto God. And so here, an example of this would be like this. Maybe you grew up in a home where you had a parent or parents who were just too busy for you. You know, you would come to them and ask a question. Maybe you need some help with some homework or something, or you just wanted to go out in the yard and play ball or whatever, but they never really had time for you. And it would be like, later, you know, we'll do that later. Chances are pretty high that you'll take that experience, and you'll project them onto God, and you'll assume he's the same. That he's this distant, preoccupied God that's just too busy to help you or really care about you. Or maybe you grew up in an environment where it seemed that no matter what you did, it was never quite good enough. Despite you giving it your all and pouring everything into whatever it is you're doing, it never measured up. And the only thing you accomplished was to disappoint. And as a result, you tend to believe the same is true about God. That he's this demanding, never satisfied deity that lives in the sky, who despite your best efforts to follow him, is perpetually disappointed in you. And you know what? That whole idea seems to be further supported by the words that Jesus says in the story that we're going to look at today. Again, like last week, he says them to one of his closest friends, a guy named Peter. If you're not familiar with Peter's story, Peter was this rough, gruff fisherman. He was brash. He was in your face. He wasn't afraid to say what was on his mind. He oftentimes spoke or acted without really thinking. We get evidence of that one day when, as he's cleaning his nets after an evening of fishing, a night of fishing, Jesus walks by and throws out an invitation, and he says, "Hey, come follow me." And Peter does. Peter drops his nets, and for the next 3 years, Peter's life is this roller coaster that's just full of adventure. It's full of angst, it's full of awe, wonder, as he witnesses and watches Jesus, as Jesus restores sight to the blind and mobility to the lame, hearing to the deaf, speech to the mute. He raises people from the dead. Peter's right there. Peter even gets to get in on these miracles that Jesus is doing. Like the one where Jesus feeds 5,000 people with nothing but a boy's sack lunch that had a couple of fish and some bread in it. Peter's so jacked up after that he, just a few hours after that whole event happened, he does something absolutely incredible. And it's during this whole event where we hear Jesus utter these words that seem, well, in light of what's happening, they seem not very nice. This story is found in the book of Matthew, which is the first book of the New Testament. You have 4 biographies of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is in the very first one. Matthew, much like Peter, is a close follower, a disciple of Jesus. And here's his recollection of what happened that night. It's a really cool story. Again, Jesus had just finished feeding these 5,000 people. They'd been out all day teaching. The disciples were listening. This large crowd was there, but nobody brought any food, and the crowd's getting hangry, and they're like, "Hey, we want something to eat." And so Jesus feeds these 5,000 people with these couple of fish and some bread. Jesus is tired, and so he comes up and he says, immediately, this is how Matthew records it, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. Which can sound like, well, why would he do that? Jesus wanted to get to the other side of the lake. And no doubt, we don't know for sure, but they probably said, well, Jesus, if you're staying here, it's going to take you like 2 or 3 days to walk around the lake. We can be there in a few hours. So how's that going to work? How are we going to meet you tomorrow? And Jesus is like, would you just get in the boat? Just get in the boat. So he makes them get in the boat and go so they can go ahead to the other side. And he stayed behind to dismiss the crowd. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, you might be thinking, if you were here last week, you tuned in last week, thinking, hey, hang on a second. Weren't these guys in a storm last week? And it's like, yes, they were. But this storm is a little different. You see, this time the men weren't freaked out about the storm. It's not entirely true. They were actually terrified, but it wasn't from the wind and the waves. They were terrified of what they saw in the storm. Check this out. Matthew continues on. He says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. Now, we have hindsight, right? We're reading this. The story's already ended. We're kind of looking back at it. So it can be easy for us to think, well, duh, it's Jesus. Like, what were they afraid of? Like, really? But put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You're paddling across a lake. The wind's against you. So it's not easy going. You're kind of just slamming your way through. And then all of a sudden you see this dude walking on the water. It'd be like, hey, look at that. There's a dude walking on water. Like it's a ghost. Get away from the ghost. Roll away from the ghost, right? But Jesus, I love this. Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It is I. He identifies himself. It's I. Don't be afraid. And what does Peter do? Peter does what he often did. He speaks before thinking. And he opens his mouth and says this, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. So Jesus, I don't know if he had a smirk on his face or not, he said, okay, come on. And then, I love this, Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. Now, let's take a time out for a second here. I have been taught, heard these words, said these words, taught on these words about this whole incident several times over the years. And often what we do is we skip past this part. You know, Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and we focus on the part that comes next. And here's a spoiler alert. He starts to sink in the water. Peter starts to sink in the water. Okay, so you know the ending, and it's like, oh, what are you doing? But let's just camp here for a second because for a few moments, maybe a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe a couple of steps, maybe a few more steps, we don't know. But for a few moments, think about this. Peter walked on water. Other than Jesus, he's the only person in history that walked on water. I mean, think about how awesome that would be. It'd be like no more BC ferries, right? It's like, yay, God. You show up on a long weekend, and it's 3 or 4 sailing away, and it's like, oh, I'll just see you guys on the other side, I'm going to walk, right? I mean, Peter walked on water. We can't afford to miss the enormity of that. I mean, the 11 other guys are probably sitting in the boat with their jaws bouncing off the deck going, oh man, I wish I had enough strength and courage to do that. Peter walked on water. What a story. I mean, here we are, 2,000 years later, sitting around living rooms scattered throughout Nanaimo and the Central Island and beyond, talking about it. Peter walked on water. But when he, and this is where we find out what happened, when he, Peter, saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Which, you know what? I probably would have said the same thing. And again, we read this. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And this is when he says these words that seem a little on the edgy side. He says, you a little faith. Why did you doubt? You know, again, whenever I've heard this story or taught on this story, this is kind of the theme we pull out of it oftentimes, is Peter's failure. You know, just another time that Peter loses his faith, another time that Peter just blew it. And if you read through his story, he blew it time after time. There was a time just before Jesus was going to be arrested and crucified on the cross, a Roman cross, that he says, someone in here is going to betray me. Someone in this room is going to betray me. He's having this last meal with his closest followers. And Peter stands up and says, never, never would I turn my back on you. I would never deny you. And he's adamant about it. And by morning, he denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. You know, depending on your view of Jesus, those words can make Jesus sound a little on the mean side. Because think about it. At least Peter tried, right? He got up out of the boat. But then it seems that Jesus pretty much calls him a failure. It's like, oh, you a little faith. And if based on your experiences, you view Jesus as that of someone who is never satisfied with your best efforts, it's not much of a stretch to hear the disappointing tone in his voice. Oh, you have little faith. You know, personally, I've often imagined Jesus having these thoughts run through his head as he watched Peter sink. He reached out as Peter was sinking. And it goes something like this. Really, Peter? Really? You and I have been hanging out for how long now? You've seen me do some incredible things, raise people from the dead and restore sight and mobility to the blind and the lame, speech to the mutes. I just fed 5,000 people and we had leftovers. And now you're out here and there's a little storm going on and you lose your faith. Like, oh, really, Peter? You're so disappointing. Those are the words or thoughts I imagine that Jesus would have had running through his mind at that time. And here's why. Because that was my experience and my belief that Jesus thought about me. That if he had come to me and sat down with me and we were going to have a little one-on-one, he would look at me and he would say, like, really, Garry? Like, really? Again? You know, on Tuesday you promised me you wouldn't do this thing anymore, and it's not even Wednesday and you've done it again. Like, what's with that? Come on. I've done this for you. I've done that for you. I've fulfilled this promise. I even did this thing that you were like, oh, this will never happen. It's impossible. It'll never happen. And I made it happen. And now things get a little bumpy, a little rough. You're about to lose your faith. It's like, man, Garry, you are such a disappointment. Here's the thing, though. Over the years, as I've spent time with Jesus, carved out some time, we talk about this all the time around here, the importance of carving out some time to be alone with God. Whether that's morning, noon, afternoon, it doesn't matter, whatever works best for you, but just spending time, slowing down, peeling back, pulling yourself out of the fast pace of life to be with Jesus so you can learn about him. And as I've done that, over the years, I've learned what his character is like. And today, I can say, I don't think that's what he would say to me, and I don't think that's what he said to Peter. I mean, what I've learned that Jesus is like is he's kind, he's caring, he's compassionate, and thank goodness he's patient. And so this is what I imagine Jesus would have said to Peter as he reached out and took hold of his hand as he began to sink. And I'm going to use a metaphor here. If you're a parent or grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, or someone like that, you might resonate with this story more. But you know what? We can all resonate at some level. I know you're smart people. You're going to keep up with this. But do you remember when you tried to teach a little kid to ride a bike? You remember that? It was rough, wasn't it? You went out and you got them a little bike, about this high, and it had the handlebars with the streamers coming out and the little basket on the front and training wheels on the back, and you said, here's your bike, and they got on and they're riding up and down around the cul-de-sac and up and down the driveway, and they're just like, yes, like, look it, I'm doing it. And you're like, yeah, you are doing it. And then comes the day you're going to take the training wheels off. And they're all excited. They're like, oh, really? And you're like, yeah, it's going to be good. But they're all freaked out, right? So what you do is you take the training wheels off and you say, okay, get on the bike. And they get on the bike. And then you put your hand under the back of the seat and you run up and down the road with them. It's the middle of August. It's like 35 degrees out. You're sweating. And I don't know why we do it then, but that's when we do it. And we run up and down the road and they're pedaling away and they're concentrating, but you're hanging on. And then one day, when they're out riding, you let go. And for a little while, they're doing it. They're riding their bike, but then they look back and they see that you let go and they crash, and it's just like kid and bike and bloods and bushes, and it's just a mess. And do you remember what you did? After you ran up to them to where they crashed, and they're standing there crying, saying, I hate you, you let go, I don't know why you let go, right? Do you remember what you did? Do you remember what you said? You come up and you look at him and you went, oh, you're such a disappointment. Oh, ye of little bike riding ability, why would you doubt? That kind of thing. That's not what you said, or at least I hope it isn't what you said. No, what you did is you scooped them up. You swung them around and you whispered in their ear, oh, you had it. You had it. You were that close. And they're like, I know, but I fell, I crashed. And you're like, I know, but you were riding a bike. And it's like, no, I wasn't. And you're like, yes, you were. Why did you let go? That was so mean. Why did you let go? And you say, because I knew you could do it. You almost had it. Next time, just trust and keep on going. That's what I imagine Jesus whispered in Peter's ear as Peter began to sink. Just keep your eyes on me next time, Peter. You've got this. Don't worry about the wind and the waves and all the voices in your head that tell you otherwise. Just keep your eyes on me. And who knows, you may walk on water as you follow me into the most incredible life of purpose and adventure. And you know what? I believe he whispers the same thing into your ear, into my ear. That no matter how many times we trip and fall or crash or sink in our circumstances, as we do our best to follow him, Jesus isn't disappointed. And that conversation that we play in our head that says Jesus is disappointed in us, it's never going to happen. No matter how many times we mess up, because Jesus isn't that kind of Jesus. You know, you of little faith, why did you doubt? They were not crass words uttered by a mean Jesus, but comforting words uttered by a loving, caring God who is cheering you on and who desires nothing more than for you to live fully alive in the adventure that he has for you. Jesus himself said, I have come to give you life and life to the full. And it's all about stepping out and trusting based on who Jesus is. And who is he? Well, listen to how this story ends. It says, when they, Peter and Jesus, climbed back into the boat, the wind died down. Last week, Jesus said, to the wind and the waves, be quiet, settle down, and everything. This time he didn't say anything. He just stepped in the boat, and the wind died down. And here's the result. Those who were in the boat worshiped him, Jesus, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. I'm going to pray for us here in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to ask you a question. I really want you to think about this. And here's the question. What area of failure comes to your mind or keeps beaking off in your head where you think God is or has been disappointed in you? Just think of a time. Maybe it's something that you just continually beat yourself up over. It's one of those things that no matter how hard you try, you just keep tripping up and doing the same thing. You say, I'll never do it again, I'll never do it again, and the next day you're doing it again. And now you just think, you know what, I've blown it. God is so disappointed in me, I don't stand a chance. And if that describes you, you know what? The best thing you can do right now is talk with somebody about it. And just be honest about how you're feeling. Because you know what you're probably going to hear when you share that with somebody? Like, I just feel like God's so disappointed in me. You're probably going to hear them say, me too. I've been there. I've experienced that. And so if you're feeling that way this morning, we've got an awesome team of people that are online right now that would love to talk with you. And you can make that happen any way you want. You can just do it in a chat room. It's completely private. You could exchange phone numbers and talk to each other on the phone, emails, whatever works best for you. All you need to do is press the prayer button, and it'll put all that into motion. And I would encourage you to take advantage of that. We're not meant to live this life alone and in isolation, even though that's what we're experiencing right now. It's just one way we can reach out. And we can learn to trust and grow our faith, because in the end, God's got you. Really, really stoked to be on this journey with you. I invite you to pray with me. God, disappointment, man, it can be so hard for us to deal with. None of us likes to be the person that people are disappointed in. And even more so if it's you that's disappointed in us. But we just need to take time, to carve out time to be alone with you, to to learn what your character is like, that you are a God that is just dripping in grace and mercy and forgiveness and love. And you're spraying it all over us. We just need to embrace that, embrace you. And so we thank you that we can face tomorrow, whatever tomorrow is going to bring for us, with confidence, knowing that you are with us, even when circumstances around us are going crazy. Thank you for loving us so much that you would come to this planet, give your life for us, so we could have the life that you have for us. And we pray this in your awesome and precious name. Amen.